The trophy gleamed on the Johnsons' kitchen table, catching the light from the single bare bulb overhead. Naomi traced its engraved letters. First place, state choral finals, when a sharp knock rattled the door. Probably Miss Dottie with leftovers. Loretta sighed, adjusting her work apron, but when she opened the door, a well-dressed woman stood holding a microphone emblazoned with a news station logo. Behind her, a cameraman adjusted his lens. Naomi Johnson. The woman smiled. I'm Diane Carter from WXLT News. Your choir director sent us your competition footage. She held up a phone, a viral video of Naomi's solo, views climbing by the thousands. We'd love to interview you for our Hidden Voices segment. Naomi's hands flew to her mouth. Behind the reporter, neighbors peeked from doorways. Tyler Reynolds gaped from the stairwell, his phone conspicuously recording. Loretta stepped forward, her voice trembling just once. You want to put my baby on TV? Not just TV. The reporter leaned in. The Symphony Hall heard your performance. They're offering a full youth mentorship if she's interested. The camera light flicked on, bathing Naomi's stunned face in gold. Somewhere downstairs, Ms. Dottie's gospel music swelled. The fire escape outside the window seemed to hum, as if whispering, "This is how the world hears you now." The school auditorium buzzed with the restless energy of students shuffling into their seats, their laughter and chatter bouncing off the walls like scattered marbles. At the center of it all, 12-year-old Naomi Johnson sat hunched over in the third row, her too big hand-me-down sweater swallowing her small frame. She kept her eyes down, tracing the frayed edges of her notebook with a finger, trying to ignore the occasional snicker tossed her way. The annual talent show sign-up sheet had been a cruel joke. Someone had scribbled her name in sloppy letters, and when Mrs. Thompson called it out during roll call, the class erupted in giggles. Naomi, singing? Tyler Reynolds, the ringleader of the school's popular crowd, had smirked loud enough for everyone to hear. This I gotta see. Naomi's chest tightened, but she didn't correct them. She never did. It was easier to let them think she was just the quiet, poor girl from the South Side who barely spoke above a whisper. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that every night after her mom left for her second job, Naomi would climb onto the fire escape outside their apartment and sing to the flickering streetlights below. The city noises would drown her out, and for those few minutes, she wasn't the girl who got free lunch or wore thrift store shoes. She was just a voice floating in the dark. Mrs. Thompson adjusted her glasses at the podium, her smile strained. Naomi, sweetheart, you're up next. The room erupted in exaggerated applause, a few kids elbowing each other. Naomi's knees wobbled as she stood, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She could feel Tyler's grin burning into her back as she stepped onto the stage, the microphone towering over her like a judgmental stranger. The spotlight hit her face, and for a heartbeat, she considered bolting. But then she caught sight of her reflection in the auditorium window, small, uncertain, invisible, and something inside her snapped. She closed her eyes. The first note trembled out, soft as a secret. Then the next came stronger, fuller, until the room seemed to tilt on its axis. By the time she hit the chorus, the sneers had melted into stunned silence. Tyler's mouth hung open. Mrs. Thompson's pen clattered to the floor. And in the back row, the music teacher, Mr. Ellis, leaned forward, his coffee forgotten, as if he'd just stumbled upon something sacred. Naomi didn't see any of it. She was somewhere else now, somewhere the music wrapped around her like armor. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just being seen. She was being heard. When the last note faded, the room stayed quiet for a beat too long. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause erupted, not the mocking kind, but the kind that made the stage vibrate under her feet. Naomi's eyes flew open to see even Tyler clapping, his smirk replaced by something she couldn't name. Mr. Ellis was already halfway down the aisle, his voice cutting through the noise. Naomi Johnson, he said, slow and deliberate, like he was tasting the words. "Where on earth have you been hiding that?" Naomi's cheeks burned, but for once it wasn't from shame. It was from the dizzying realization that maybe, just maybe, she'd accidentally given them all the wrong story about who she was. And now they were listening. The moment Naomi stepped off the stage, the whispers followed her like a second shadow. Kids who'd never glanced her way before suddenly leaned in as she passed, their voices hushed but urgent. "Did you know she could sing like that? Why doesn't she ever talk?" Even Tyler lingered near the water fountain, pretending not to watch as Mr. Ellis pulled Naomi aside, his voice low but electric. "Naomi, I've been teaching music for 20 years, he said, tapping the edge of his clipboard. "What you just did? That's not just talent, that's a gift." He pressed a flyer into her hand. Citywide youth choir auditions, scholarships available, and her stomach flipped. The paper felt heavy, like it held more than just words. At home, Naomi's mom, Loretta, was too exhausted to notice the way her daughter's fingers kept brushing the flyer in her pocket. She stirred a pot of beans on the stove, her uniform still smelling of fry grease from her shift. "How was school, baby?" she asked, and Naomi almost told her about the stage, the silence, the way the air had changed when she sang. But then the landlord's knock rattled the door, and Loretta's shoulders tensed. "Not now, Mr. Jenkins," she muttered, turning the stove flame higher. Naomi swallowed the words. There'd be no money for choir trips or fancy auditions. Not this month. Maybe not ever. The next morning, Naomi found the flyer crumpled in her backpack, the edges frayed from her restless fingers. At school, the hallway chatter stuttered when she walked by. A girl from the basketball team, Maya, sidled up to her at lunch. "You gonna try out for that choir thing?" she asked, nodding at the paper Naomi hadn't realized she'd been staring at. Naomi shrugged, but Maya grinned. "You should. My cousin made it last year. They perform at the state capitol." The way she said it made Naomi's pulse skip, but then Tyler's voice cut through from the next table. "Bet she chokes," he said, loud enough to carry. Stage was probably a fluke. His friends snickered, but Maya rolled her eyes. "Ignore him," she whispered. "He's just mad 'cause the only thing he's good at is being a jerk." Naomi almost smiled. Almost. That afternoon, Mr. Ellis cornered her after class. "Auditions are Saturday," he said, eyeing the flyer she'd tried to hide under her math book. "I can give you a ride if you need." Naomi's throat went dry. She thought of her mom's tired eyes, the unpaid bills, the way dreams in their house were like candles, too easily snuffed out. But then she remembered the silence in the auditorium, that fleeting moment when she'd been more than her circumstances. "Okay," she whispered. Mr. Ellis beamed. "Good. Because talent like yours?" He adjusted his glasses, and for the first time, Naomi noticed the faded choir pin on his lapel. "It doesn't belong in the shadows." The days crawled by in a nervous blur until Saturday arrived. Naomi woke before dawn, her stomach tangled in knots. She tiptoed past her mother's bedroom. Loretta had picked up an extra overnight shift, and paused at the front door, her hand hovering over the knob. What if Mr. Ellis changed his mind? What if this was all some cruel joke? The flyer crumpled in her sweaty palm as she stepped outside into the chilly morning air, where Mr. Ellis's rusty sedan idled at the curb. "Ready for your big day?" he asked, handing her a paper cup of hot chocolate. The warmth seeped through her fingers as they drove past rows of boarded-up storefronts in their neighborhood, then into parts of the city Naomi had only seen from bus windows, tree-lined streets, buildings with gleaming glass doors. The audition hall loomed ahead, its marble steps crowded with kids clutching sheet music, flanked by parents with expensive cameras. Naomi shrank in her seat. Mr. Ellis turned off the engine. "Listen," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Out there, it's not about where you're from. It's about what you carry here." He tapped his chest. Naomi nodded, but her knees shook as she followed the signs to the check-in table. A woman with a clipboard eyed her faded jeans. Name? Naomi. Johnson. The woman scanned her list, frowned. No accompanist? No prepared piece? Behind her, a girl in a satin dress giggled, whispering to her mother. Naomi's ears burned. She hadn't known she needed those things. Then, I'll accompany her. Mr. Ellis appeared at her shoulder, rolling up his sleeves. We'll do his. Eye is on the sparrow. Naomi gaped. That was the hymn she'd hummed under her breath in his class last week. He'd remembered. The audition room was cavernous, the judges' faces unreadable in the shadows. Naomi's mouth went cotton dry. But when Mr. Ellis played the first notes on the piano, slow, soulful, something loosened in her chest. She closed her eyes and sang like she did on the fire escape, for no one but the night. When she finished, one judge removed her glasses. The other leaned forward. Who taught you to phrase like that? He asked. Naomi blinked. No one, sir. I just feel it. A murmur passed between them. Then the woman smiled. Well, Miss Johnson, it seems you've been hiding a national treasure in your lungs. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, its crisp white envelope stark against the chipped paint of Naomi's mailbox. She stood frozen in the dim hallway of their apartment building, her fingers trembling as she traced the embossed choir logo. The weight of what it might say pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. Upstairs, the muffled sound of her mother's voice drifted through the thin walls. She was on the phone with the electric company again, her tone fraying at the edges. Naomi slipped the envelope into her backpack, unopened. Some news needed. The right moment. School that day moved through her like a dream. Tyler's usual taunts bounced off her as she replayed the judge's words in her head. At lunch, Maya plopped down beside her, her basketball jersey still damp with sweat from practice. Well? She demanded through a mouthful of sandwich. Did you make it? Naomi's hand drifted to her backpack where the envelope lay hidden. Before she could answer, Mr. Ellis appeared in the cafeteria doorway, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. The way his shoulders relaxed told her everything. The choir room was empty except for the afternoon sun slanting across the piano. Mr. Ellis leaned against it, arms crossed. You haven't opened it, have you? Naomi shook her head, the envelope, suddenly burning a hole through her backpack. He chuckled. I got the call this morning. You're in, Naomi. Full scholarship. The words hung between them, too big to grasp all at once. They want you to start this weekend. There's just... His voice hitched in a way that made her stomach drop. It's downtown, early mornings. Your mom? The unspoken question lingered as Naomi walked home that evening, the now opened letter clutched in her hand. The apartment smelled of bleach and burnt toast. Loretta had clearly been cleaning to distract herself from the overdue bills stacked on the counter. When Naomi showed her the letter, her mother's hands stilled on the dish rag. For a long moment she just stared at the choir's gold seal, her expression unreadable. Then quietly, how would you get there? Those buses don't run that early. Naomi had anticipated this. Mr. Ellis said he could pick me up, just until we can... She trailed off, watching her mother's face tighten at the mention of relying on someone else's kindness. The silence stretched, filled only by the drip of the kitchen faucet. Finally, Loretta let out a slow breath and reached for the letter again, her fingers smoothing the crumpled edges Naomi hadn't realized she'd made. You really want this? She asked, her voice softer now. Naomi didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. Loretta studied her face for a long moment, then tucked the letter into the frame of the cracked mirror above the sink, the place where they kept important things. All right then, she murmured, turning back to the dishes. But you're not riding in that old car of his every day. I'll talk to Ms. Dottie down the hall. Her grandson works downtown. Naomi threw her arms around her mother's waist, pressing her face into the familiar starch of her work uniform. Loretta stiffened at first. Affection was a luxury she rarely had time for, then relaxed, one soapy hand coming to rest lightly on Naomi's head. "Just remember," she said quietly, "no matter how far that voice carries you." She didn't finish, but Naomi understood. The apartment, the bills, the fire escape serenades, they would always be her beginning. The next morning, as Naomi waited for Ms. Dottie's grandson's beat-up Honda, Maya came barreling down the sidewalk, her backpack half unzipped. "You're really doing it," she gasped, shoving a crumpled paper bag into Naomi's hands. Inside was a slightly smashed muffin and a handmade bracelet with tiny music notes. "For luck," Maya said, already backing toward school. "Now go be amazing so I can say I knew you when." As the car pulled away from the curb, Naomi pressed her forehead to the window, watching her neighborhood shrink behind her. The bracelet slid against her wrist, a quiet promise. Whatever waited downtown, she was ready. The choir rehearsal space took Naomi's breath away, a soaring auditorium with vaulted ceilings where sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the wooden floors with kaleidoscope colors. 30 kids stood in perfect rows, their voices blending into something greater than the sum of its parts. Naomi hovered near the door in her second-hand sweater until a girl with box braids and a nose ring broke from the group. "You must be the secret weapon," she said, grinning. "I'm Jada. Heard you blew the judges away." She pulled Naomi into the alto section just as the director, a formidable woman with silver streaks in her twists, clapped her hands. "New member, front and center." The room fell silent as Naomi walked forward on unsteady legs. "Let's hear what you can do with this little light of mine. Key of G." The pianist began without giving her time to panic. Naomi closed her eyes and let the music take over, her voice growing stronger with each measure. When she opened them again, Jada was beaming and the boy next to her mouthed, "Wow." After rehearsal, the director handed Naomi a stack of sheet music and a practice schedule. "You'll need to memorize these by next week," she said, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "And Johnson, that raw talent is a gift, but discipline." She tapped the papers. "This is how you honor it." The next month passed in a whirlwind of early mornings and late nights. Naomi would practice in the school bathroom between classes, her reflection bouncing off the tiles as she worked through tricky runs. At home, she'd mouth the words silently after Loretta went to bed, tracing the notes with her finger when the electricity got cut off again. One rainy Thursday, she came home to find Ms. Dottie's grandson waiting out front with a worried frown. "Your mama got hurt at work," he said. "Burned her hand real bad at the fryer. They took her to County General." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. Loretta sat stiffly on an exam table, her right hand wrapped in thick gauze. "It's nothing," she insisted. But Naomi saw how her jaw tightened when the doctor said 3 weeks of recovery. No work meant no pay. No pay meant, "Miss?" A nurse interrupted Naomi's spiraling thoughts. "Your mother needs to rest." Visiting hours are over. On the bus ride home, Naomi stared at the choir schedule in her lap. Saturday's rehearsal conflicted with Loretta's follow-up appointment. The state competition date loomed over the same week as rent was due. She thought of the way her mother had looked at her when she'd first brought home the choir letter. That mix of pride and quiet terror. The apartment felt too big when she unlocked the door. Naomi sat at the edge of her bed, the sheet music spread before her like a map to somewhere far away. Downstairs, Ms. Dottie's TV blared a gospel choir performance. The voices swelled through the floorboards, wrapping around Naomi's aching heart. She reached for her backpack and pulled out her notebook. "Dear Director Hayes," she wrote, then stopped. The pencil hovered over the page as the choir's final hymn floated up from below. "I'm gonna let it shine." The pencil tip snapped against the paper as Naomi stared at the unfinished letter. Outside, the city sounds rose up, Honking cars, a distant siren, the rhythmic thump of Ms. Dottie's gospel music through the floorboards. She crumpled the paper and reached for her backpack instead, pulling out the sheet music for their competition piece. The notes blurred as she traced them with her finger, humming softly until the melody steadied her breathing. Morning light found Naomi at the kitchen table, surrounded by a dozen carefully folded paper cranes made from rejected letter drafts. Loretta's bedroom door creaked open, her bandaged hand cradled close. "You're up early," she murmured, pausing at the sight of the cranes. Naomi wordlessly pushed a mug of tea toward her, steam curling between them. "I talked to Miss Dottie," Naomi said finally. "Her church needs someone to help with their food pantry on Saturdays. Pays cash." She watched her mother's face carefully. "I could go to early rehearsal, then work after. Just until—" Loretta's fingers tightened around the mug. "That competition you've been practicing for, we'll figure it out." Naomi surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. She reached for one of the cranes, unfolding it to reveal her abandoned resignation letter. "But I'm not quitting." The hospital bracelet on Loretta's wrist crinkled as she reached out, her good hand hovering over the sheet music. "Play it for me," she said quietly. "The one that's got you working so hard." Naomi's voice started small, filling their cramped kitchen as dawn painted the walls gold. When she reached the high note, the one that had given her trouble, Loretta joined in, her raspy alto weaving through Naomi's clear tones like a safety net. They hadn't sung together since Naomi was small, before the overtime shifts and overdue bills. The harmony settled around them, warm as the steam from their untouched tea. At school, Maya intercepted Naomi at her locker. "Emergency soprano meeting," she announced, dragging her to the choir room where Mr. Ellis stood with an unexpected visitor. Director Hayes, her signature silver-streaked twists pinned up. "We've been discussing logistics," the director said without preamble, pulling a bus schedule from her bag. "The 7:15 express gets you to rehearsal by 8. One of our parent volunteers can drive you back." She slid a second paper across the piano bench, a permission slip for the state competition. "Your mother just needs to sign." Naomi's throat tightened. "But the fees—" "Scholarship covers everything." Director Hayes's smile was brief but bright. "Even hotel meals." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Oh, and Johnson? That arrangement you were humming at auditions. We're using it for the finale." The bell rang, scattering the moment. Maya whooped, shaking Naomi's shoulders as Mr. Ellis discreetly wiped his glasses. Out the window, the first fall leaves spiraled down, catching sunlight as they fell. Naomi pressed the bus schedule to her chest, already hearing the harmony. Not just of voices, but of chances, small and stubborn, learning to weave together. The morning of the state competition dawned with a brittle winter chill, the kind that seeped through coat sleeves and rattled bus windows. Naomi sat stiffly in her seat, the starched white blouse of her choir uniform scratching her neck. Loretta had stayed up late ironing it, her bandaged hand moving carefully over the fabric while Naomi packed and repacked her sheet music. "You nervous?" Jada nudged her as their bus merged onto the highway. The city skyline shrank behind them, replaced by frost-tipped fields. Naomi rubbed her palms against her thighs. "What if I miss a note, forget the words?" Jada popped a peppermint in her mouth and offered one to Naomi. "Honey, you could sneeze mid-song and still sound better than half these suburban choirs." The venue took Naomi's breath away. A grand concert hall with velvet seats and chandeliers that scattered light like diamonds. Backstage, the air buzzed with warm-up scales and the rustle of programs. Naomi closed her eyes, running through the harmonies in her head, when a familiar laugh made her spine stiffen. Tyler Reynolds stood near the water cooler in a rival school's blazer, flanked by his smug-faced teammates. His eyes locked onto Naomi with a smirk. "Look who crawled out of the projects," he said. loud enough to draw glances. "Your mom finally let you out of babysitting duty?" Jada stepped forward, but Naomi caught her wrist. The old shame burned in her chest, but then she remembered the kitchen duet with Loretta, the way Maya had grinned handing her that muffin, Mr. Ellis's steadying presence at the piano. She straightened her shoulders and met Tyler's gaze. "Guess you'll have to beat me fair and square this time," she said, her voice clear. The shock on his face was almost comical. Before he could retort, Director Hayes clapped her hands. "Places, everyone!" As the choir filed on stage, the spotlight hit Naomi's face, just like it had that first day in the auditorium. But this time, she didn't shrink. The piano began, and when her solo came, she sang like she was back on the fire escape, like her mother was listening, like every quiet kid with a secret talent might hear her and find courage. The final note hung in the air, shimmering, before the applause erupted. Backstage, Tyler avoided her eyes. Jada squeezed her hand. "And Director Hayes?" She simply nodded, her smile proud and knowing. The real victory wasn't the trophy they'd won. It was the way Naomi finally believed, deep in her bones, that she belonged on that stage. The bus ride home was quieter than the one there, the choir's exhaustion mixing with a contented hum of triumph. Naomi leaned her forehead against the cool glass window, watching streetlights blur into golden streaks against the darkening sky. The trophy sat securely in Jada's lap, its polished surface reflecting the occasional headlight from passing cars. Loretta was waiting at the bus stop, her work apron still tied around her waist, her healed hand clutching a single, slightly crumpled balloon. When Naomi stepped off the bus, her mother didn't say a word, just pulled her into a tight hug, the balloon bobbing above them like a second moon. "You should have seen her, Ms. Johnson," Jada called from the bus steps, grinning. "They practically had to scrape the judge's jaws off the floor." Loretta laughed, a sound Naomi realized she hadn't heard in far too long. "Oh, I believe it," she said, squeezing Naomi's shoulder. That night, as Naomi carefully placed the trophy on their rickety bookshelf, Loretta handed her an envelope. Inside was a flyer for a summer music program, one Naomi had never dared mention, assuming it was impossible. "Director Hayes called me," Loretta said softly. "Said they've got scholarships, and that you've got a real shot." Naomi's throat tightened. "But the money, we'll make it work." Loretta's voice was firm, her eyes bright with something fierce. "You think I'm letting a voice like yours go to waste?" The next morning, Naomi climbed onto the fire escape for the first time in months. The city stretched before her, alive and humming, and as she sang, she imagined her voice weaving through the streets, reaching other girls like her, quiet dreamers with hidden talents, waiting for their moment to shine. She wasn't just the poor black girl anymore. She was Naomi Johnson, singer, and this was only the beginning.